with Jimmy Kimmel being forced off the air because the 80-year-old diapered orange dementia patient had the big feelings and decided to throw a tantrum because he didn't like what was being said. It's important for us to define where we are as a country, because the moment that leadership starts taking comedians off the air, it should be a signal, one of many signals, that we are past the point of no return. And it's critical for the average citizen to start fighting back. I think the irony of all of this is that, unsurprisingly to most of us, the constitutional conservatives are nowhere to be found. They are, in fact, cheering along and rationalizing all of these things as the stroked out salmon color Save-A-Lot Stalin continues on his march to do whatever he can to distract and hide what's clearly incriminating evidence about not only him, but the entire political class, the entire billionaire class that's hidden away in the Epstein files. That's what this is all about. But while this particular episode isn't about what's in the Epstein files, I think it's important for us to understand that anything and everything is being done to distract attention away from that and point us to other things. But multiple things can be true at the same time. Yes, this is a distraction. And yes, this is part of a continued effort by Republicans powered by the billionaire class and the Heritage Foundation to fundamentally transform society into their vision of the ideal future. That ideal future for them is a billionaire dominated techno feudal society. The billionaires want to consolidate as much power and as much of the resources as they can. And let's understand, the combined wealth of all of these billionaires in the world accounts for $16 trillion. That's more than the wealth of any country that exists in the world today, with the exception of the US and China. And that's not enough for these people. These people want to consolidate even more resources and relegate as many of the population into desperate poverty so that they can have a permanent underclass that they can exploit and discard as they see fit. Pair that with the dreams of organizations like the Heritage Foundation, who want to create a white ethno state and a theocracy, and you have a recipe for a complete dystopian future where the average person is used and discarded like a piece of gum. That's what we're marching towards today. If you think that I'm being dramatic about it, let's understand that these are the exact words of people like Curtis Yarwin, who has a massive influence within the Silicon Valley tech sector. All of these tech billionaires think this guy is a genius. And he is the person that is calling for a post-democracy social order, one where countries and regions are run in a very similar way to how corporations are run, with a CEO at the top who has absolute control and decides what happens and what doesn't happen. That's the Curtis Yarwin, the philosophical foundation of how these tech bros operate. That's what's happening on the one hand. On the other hand, you have the people that are cheering along in the hopes of making their dreams of having a white Christian nationalist ethno state take hold. You have people like Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation, openly saying several times that they are in the midst of a second American Revolution, and they are committed to bringing their vision to life, and it will remain bloodless as long as the left allows it. And in their context, the left is anyone who is not a red hat MAGA supporter. Let's be clear, between the tech oligarchs and the religious right, we have the foundation of the modern Nazi party. These are a group of fascists, and it's important for us to understand that this is just not a blanket label. We need to be able to define fascists by what they do. And this is where Umberto Eco's 14 Pillars of Fascism comes in handy, because it gives us a clear map of the goals of any fascist, totalitarian, dictatorship. And this exactly mirrors what's happening in this current regime. So who was Umberto Eco? Eco was somebody who grew up in Mussolini's Italy. And what he noted was that there are many different flavors of fascism that can exist, but in order to recognize what they stand for, it's important for us to make sure that we're mapping out the pillars that the ideology is built on. So let's take a look at those 14 pillars and understand how many of these have already been built in the US, which points to a clear direction that we're heading. The first pillar is the cult of tradition. And this pillar always harkens back to a great era in the past. That tried and true core beliefs are things that we should bring back to the future to prevent the moral rot that exists within society today. The second pillar is a rejection of modernism. Anything that is viewed as progress towards a more egalitarian society is something that is in opposition to the goals of what fascists strive for. They reject the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. While they parrot things that we would think make sense, their philosophy is rooted in a rejection of anything that involves reason or critical thought. They want blind obedience to tradition and traditional values. The third pillar is that they're a cult of action for action's sake. They've often said that action is beautiful in and of itself, and it must be taken before or without any previous reflection. Thinking is a form of emasculation. Think about that. The act of thinking makes you less manly, is what that says. Does that sound familiar? Disagreement is treason. That's the fourth pillar of Eco's 14 pillars of fascism. The critical spirit makes distinctions, and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. In modern culture, the scientific community praises disagreement as a way to improve knowledge. Disagreement is treason. Creating a community of disagreement is against what fascism stands for. So, in effect, fascism wants a backwardsness in society so that it can thrive. Fear of difference. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruder. Think in groups and out groups. What's the entire MAGA platform built on? It's built on othering anybody and everybody that isn't a white Christian male. Think about all the groups that today's red hat party wants to put away in camps, because it's rooted in the fear of the different, but it's also rooted in the belief that anybody that isn't a white Christian male is subhuman. That's the root of today's fascist movement in the US. The sixth pillar is the appeal to social frustration. One of the most typical features of the historical fascism was the appeal to a frustrated middle class, a class suffering from an economic crisis or feelings of political humiliation, and frightened by the pressure of lower social groups. Think about the last 10 plus years, and think about the Republican Party in general. They're always pointing the finger at some group and telling people to be afraid of them, whether it's the Muslims, whether it's the trans community, whether it's the LGBTQIA plus community, whether it's blacks or immigrants. The Republican Party has built a brand on pointing the finger, and that finger provides a distraction for their largely uneducated voter base who is operating in survival mode. Let's keep in mind that the Republican voter base is made up of largely uneducated, non-college educated white male. And on top of that, their voting demographic is the biggest consumer of federal aid. So when you think about that population, you have a population of uneducated people who are in survival mode, and they're being animated into hate by the Republican Party, who points the finger at everybody else and says, the reason why you're struggling the way that you're struggling is because of those people. That is part and parcel the Republican playbook, which is at this point a carbon copy playbook of what the failed Austrian painter put into place to take over Germany. That is what we're looking at. This past election, what were all the red hats saying? Oh, we want cheaper eggs. How's that working out? Literally everything is more expensive right now. The economy is worse off. GDP has been worse than it was when Biden was president, and food prices are up, inflation is up. So we're dealing with a scenario where you have a down economy, fewer jobs, higher prices. Trump is doing exactly what you expect somebody who's had 6 bankruptcies. This is a con man who convinced the population that they should be more concerned about what bathroom people are using than the fact that this guy is a bought and paid for asset and controlled by several foreign countries, allegedly, and that you should pay zero attention to what he did the first go around. That's how powerful the appeal to social frustration, the 6th pillar of fascism, is when it comes to consolidating power. The 7th pillar, the obsession with a plot. Eco says that at the root of the fascist psychology, there's an obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The followers of the ideology must feel besieged. You ever notice how red hats fall for every conspiracy theory under the sun? You remember how J6 was a deep state plot that was organized by Nancy Pelosi? You remember how the first go around, the deep state runs everything and he's going to clear the swamp? The reason why you're poor and broke and barely surviving is because the deep state did this to you. Remember how billionaires are gathering together at pizza parlors to bathe in kids' blood? How many plots? How many plots have these red hats believed? Migrants are eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. Does that ring a bell? This is why we call the voter base of these people the dumbest voter base in history, because they will believe anything that their stroked out, salmon colored, save a lot Stalin tells them. The 8th pillar, the enemy is both strong and weak. By a continuous shifting of rhetorical focus, the enemies are at the same time too strong and too weak. Let's understand this. The entire debate and argument that Trump and all of his regime cohorts have put forward is that you have billionaire Democrats controlling everything. And yet, while they're controlling everything, they can't seem to get elected or win meaningful change in any of the things that they want to get done. You have this all powerful deep state that is controlling everything. And yet, this guy and his regime control everything, and the economy is worse. Everything is worse since he's taken over. And the entire rationale for this regime's existence is built on a bunch of contradictions. These are the people that say, you better not keep pushing us because we're going to go to civil war and all of us red hats own all the guns and you guys can't shoot. And at the same time, they're making the argument that anytime that some white male goes on a shooting rampage, oh, that's automatically a liberal. I thought we don't own guns and can't shoot. Which is it? These are people that are so wrapped up in their conspiracy theories and their contradictions that they can't think straight. Never mind that the vast majority of political violence that's been committed in this country have been committed by the far right. That is an example of how they're twisted and backwards thinking. You can't present reason to them because on its face they reject reason, and everything makes sense in their own minds. This is why I consistently say that these people live in an alternate reality. The 9th pillar, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. This is why these people never compromise. No matter how many facts that you present them, no matter how much evidence you present them, they never concede their positions because that means that you're collaborating with the enemy. Let's understand what's at the root of Republican politics and MAGA in particular. It's a binary solution for that. It's purely a question of survival. In order for them to survive, everyone else must die. They fundamentally do not believe that anyone else has a right to exist. Let's clearly state what they stand for. This is what they believe, and this is why it is near impossible to have these people see reason. And that belief system has its roots in evangelical Christianity, and particularly Calvinism. Evangelical Christians believe only a certain amount of people are saved, and there is nothing that you can do if you're in the unsaved category to make you saved. And the most extreme versions of evangelical Christians believe that the only people that are saved are white Christians. And when you look at Calvinism and its concepts of predestination and predetermination, it's a lose lose scenario. This is why these people are so lacking in empathy. They believe empathy is a sin because they don't think it's actually worthwhile. They see no purpose in the world of today existing. Their goal is to usher in this rapture where Caucasian space Jesus comes back and saves all of them and leaves all of us heathens to burn in a lake of fire. That's what these people believe. And when you look at the furthest depths of the far right spaces, that's why these people are so nihilistic, because their goal is to usher forward the end. So any discussion of trying to make the world that we live in today better is wasted effort, because their goal is do whatever is possible so that they can be ushered into paradise in the next life. When I've said over and over again that these people belong to a messianic death cult, the fact that they're rooted in seeing pacifism as collaborating and trafficking with the enemy, that's where the connection exists. The 10th pillar, contempt for the weak. This ties in again with the broader philosophy that most MAGA have. And when you tie that into contempt for the weak, as Eco says, elitism is a typical aspect of any reactionary ideology. Let's drill that down. When you look at contempt for the weak and the lack of empathy that the right and fascist movements have, and particularly MAGA has, this is why they reject all of the things that Jesus said: feed the hungry, clothe the naked, heal the sick, visit the imprisoned. None of that applies, because they fundamentally believe that if you are successful in monetary terms, if today, that's because you did good things. If you are poor or anything undesirable, you did that to yourself. And you are owed no sympathy, you're owed no empathy, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That is what this is rooted in. Contempt for the weak is a hallmark of fascist movements, and you see that on display within red hat circles. These are the people that are cheering that brown people might get fed to alligators. Contempt for the weak shows up all over the place in MAGA circles. And you saw a recent example of it on Fox News. Brian Kilmeade in their morning show said that the way to solve the homeless problem is involuntary lethal injections. He, a couple days later, after he caught flack over it, pushed forward a lukewarm apology. But that sort of belief is embedded within this culture. And guess what happens a couple days after he says that? Somebody goes on a shooting spree and does some serious damage across 2 homeless encampments in Minnesota. Who wants to bet that person probably caught that broadcast? Something to think about. The 11th pillar: everybody is educated to become a hero. According to Eco, he states that one of the goals of fascist societies is to make a hero out of everybody. And it creates a cult of heroism that's tied directly with a cult of death. And this is when we talk about in groups and out groups. If you're part of the in group of the fascist movement, everybody else is an enemy. And it's incumbent on you to exterminate the enemy. And if you exterminate the enemy, you're the hero. This again ties in with some of those other pillars. And this again ties into our experiences in trying to talk to these people, where they will not yield because they see you as an enemy and your only purpose is to be exterminated by them. Why do you think these people are constantly calling for civil war? Anytime they get a hangnail or hurt feelings, they want a civil war, because this is a death cult. This is a messianic death cult that is committed to wiping out anybody that doesn't believe what they believe. We saw these people in the Dark Ages. These were people that were involved in the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. It's the same cloth. This is the Confederacy, which spawned the Nazis, which has spawned MAGA. It's a straight line. These are all rotten fruit from the same poison tree of white supremacy. The 12th pillar: machismo and weaponry. So according to Eco, machismo implies both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. Now, depending on where in the far right you are, some of this gets a little fuzzy. If you're talking about the Groypers and Nick Fuentes, they hate women, which is why they groom certain members of their population to be femboys or trans so that they can still get their rocks off. And they justify it by saying that this is part of the Roman and Greco-Roman tradition where older alphas would have effeminate men or boys as their consorts. But think about the machismo and weaponry part. Anytime something happens, what do you see on social media platforms? You see these gravy seals and couch commandos make cringy ass videos talking about, I'm coming for you. It's absolutely ridiculous. Their obsession with having more weaponry than some countries is really telling. These are the people that are constantly telling you that if you do X, Y, or Z, you're not an alpha. They're obsessed with this fake term of being an alpha while being the type of people who would probably get winded on a trip from their couch to their fridge. That's who these people are. Think about how they react to the LGBTQIA plus community. While at the same time, anytime a Republican convention is in town, Grindr goes down. How does that work exactly? When you think about how far off on the machismo scale these people go, let's understand what it is. At some level, they recognize how weak and pathetic they are. That's why they have to put on this cosplay as if they're superior to anybody else. Their entire persona is rooted in the idea that they're a supreme, but what are they reacting to? They're reacting to a world where it's becoming increasingly more and more difficult for them to compete on an even footing. They're seeing countries and people surpass them because they've been raised from birth and have been told that they're the master race. And yet, here they are as the master race, largely uneducated and largely on public assistance. But it's somebody else's fault. They've never had to struggle or work or grit anything out. And they deny that they have privilege. And all of that is pushed down for the easy scapegoat of those people over there are why we're struggling. That's at the base of what's going on here. The 13th pillar of Umberto's 14 pillars of fascism, selective populism. This again ties in with in-groups and out-groups. If you're part of the in-group of this fascist movement, your positions are framed as you're the voice of the people. Let's think about it from a historical perspective. The failed Austrian painter came to power getting roughly 33% support from the population. The melon felon is in power with roughly 37% of the population supporting him. But the messaging has been, oh, this was an overwhelming victory. It just proves that everybody wants what our vision for the future is. It's clearly not rooted in the facts, but as JD Vance has said before, we will absolutely push forward a lie if it serves our agenda. And keep in mind, JD Vance has recently been going out on podcasts pretending to be some sort of statistician, tossing out the claim that the vast majority of political violence occurs from the left when that's clearly not in line with the facts. It's so unsupported by data that the regime had to pull down their own study, which showed that the vast majority of these instances are pushed by right-wing nut jobs. The 14th pillar is Newspeak. All the Nazi or fascist school books made use of an improvised vocabulary and elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex or critical reasoning. This is why they want to whitewash everything that's out there. This is why they're banning books and taking research studies offline, because they don't want people to actually know what the truth is. And when you think about how typically this regime and their minions behave when presented with facts or evidence, oh, that's fake news. It's not real. It was AI. This is a deeply uncritical, unserious, stupid, and dangerous group of people. So when you think about Umberto Eco and his 14 pillars of fascism, you can check every box when it comes to the red hats that are running around. We are far along the road where we're almost at the point of no return. And the faster we get away from sugarcoating where we are, the better off we're going to be. We have seen every week since this regime took over, we've seen another step getting us closer to a totalitarian state. And it's going to be critical for all of us to speak up and become louder and more aggressive in pushing back against this. But the demographic that needs to do this the most, white people who don't agree with this, needs to step up to the front, because the only way that this gets any momentum is if you get out of your discomfort and actually step forward. You cannot be relying on underrepresented communities to lead from the front on this, because the regime wants to massacre anyone that isn't white. So it's got to be led from those of you who call yourself allies. You need to actually be accomplices and lead this from the front. As I've said before, if we're not at the point of no return, we're pretty damn close, and you got to get off the couches.